Shalom and welcome. I'm Andrea Pass, and I'm the co-chair, along with Lois Mizell, of the Programs and Events Committee of the Fair Lawn Jewish Center Congregation B'nai Israel. Welcome also to those of you joining us via live stream. Today, we are proud to present the impact of current events on anti-Semitism, a discussion with Abraham Foxman, National Director Emeritus of the Anti-Defamation League. We are so thrilled that so many of you have joined us for what we know will be an important and informative event. Before we begin, we want to share some thank yous, give you the framework for the program, and introduce our participants. First, we want to thank the following endowed funds of this synagogue whose generous contributions made this event possible: the Cecile Roth Fund, the Bud Kessler Fund, Jeffrey Yagoda Fund, and the Shirley Pintel Fund. Thank you very much. We also want to thank those who have worked behind the scenes to make this event happen, with particular thanks to Rich Rosen, Craig Mont, and Thorin Tritter. Also thanks to Frank Kessler, Shifra Ansonoff, Scott Pass, Mark Mizell, Craig Mont, Miriam Levin, Sarit Hand, and Gary Borer in helping us today. Thank you to our synagogue president, Steve Montag, for setting up the electronics, and thank you to Rabbi Ron Roth for being our official photographer today. We would also like to recognize Rabbi Rachel Salston, the rabbi of this synagogue, our Rabbi Emeritus, Rabbi Ron Roth, our cantor, Yoni Stokar, as well as any other members of the clergy who are joining us today. And we also recognize Fair Lawn Councilwoman Gail Rottenstrick, who has also joined us. Your generous donations in registering for today's event are going to two important organizations: Magen David Adom, Israel's National Emergency Medical Disaster Ambulance and Blood Bank Service, and Leket Israel, the leading food rescue organization in Israel. If you would like to provide an additional donation, please see me or Lois after the program, as your donations are graciously appreciated. Thank you to all. Before we go further, we would like to ask everyone to please kindly silence your cell phones so that all of the attention could be spent listening to our program. And next, the order of the program. We will start with our singing of the national anthem and the Hatikva. Then we will introduce our participants, Abe Foxman and our moderator, Neil Garfinkel. And following the discussion, Mr. Foxman will take questions from the audience. So please save those questions until we get to the Q&A portion of the program, and you will have that opportunity to come up to the microphone to ask those questions. We now invite Cantor Yoni Stokar to the Bima to lead us in the national anthem and the Hatikva. Please rise.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Kol nefesh Yehudi homiya ulfatei mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia od lo avda tikvateinu hatikva bat shnot alpayim liot amchavshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim liot amchavshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim.
Thank you, Yoni, and please take your seats. I'd like to now ask Neil Garfinkel and Abe Foxman to step up to the bima for introductions. Today's moderator is Neil Garfinkel. Neil has 29 years of experience as a high school history teacher and Holocaust educator at the former George Washington High School in Washington Heights. He is a 2014 Museum Teacher Fellow from the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and a member of the Midwest Holocaust Education Consortium. In 2022 to 23, Neil was selected to be part of the U.S. Holocaust Museum's Community of Holocaust Education Center programs. From 2015 to 2019, he was program liaison for the Holocaust and Jewish Resistance Teachers Program. Neil has led many groups of middle and high school English and history teachers from across the country to Germany and Poland to study the Holocaust. Neil currently serves as executive vice president of this synagogue, has served as principal of the religious school, and teaches about the kinder transport to the 6th and 7th graders for Yom HaShoah. Neil lives in Fairlawn with his wife Christina and sons Maxwell and Benjamin. Thank you, Neil, for moderating today's discussion.
My pleasure.
We are honored and privileged today to hear from Abe Foxman. Mr. Foxman is world-renowned as a leader in the fight against anti-Semitism, bigotry, and discrimination, and regularly speaks out on issues of global anti-Semitism, the war on terrorism, church-state issues, and issues relating to the Holocaust, which he survived as a hidden child. He is a passionate supporter of the State of Israel and a voice for peace in the Middle East. Mr. Foxman is National Director Emeritus of the Anti-Defamation League, from which he retired in 2015 after 50 years with the organization, including serving as National Director from 1987 through 2015. Upon retirement, he served as Vice Chairman of the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City. He is the author of several books and co-authored Viral Hate, containing its spread on the internet. During his long career, he had personal consultations with government leaders in Europe, Israel and the Middle East, the Far East, Latin America, and Africa. He has also had multiple audiences at the Vatican, including with Pope Francis, and conferred with US presidents from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama. A Holocaust survivor, Mr. Foxman has been a member of the President's United States Holocaust Memorial Council, appointed by Presidents Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Clinton, and Biden. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Abraham Foxman. And now we turn the program over to you, Neil.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. Foxman, welcome. Welcome to Fairlawn. Welcome to the Fairlawn Jewish Center. Welcome to our beautiful sanctuary. I only wish that the sun was out so you could see the sun coming through the glare, coming through the windows. This is the thrill of a lifetime for me, to be sitting here with you, having a conversation with not only the 30-year National Director of the ADL, but currently its Director Emeritus, and also a hidden child survivor. But we can talk about that the next time you come. Why don't we start right now? Why don't we get right to the point while you're here? And why don't we start with some grim statistics from your former organization, the Anti-Defamation League. So the Anti-Defamation League Center on Extremism has tracked 2,031 anti-Semitic incidents in the United States since October 7th, which is the highest number of incidents during any 2-month period in the 40-plus years the ADL has been tracking. This represents a 337% increase. And this includes 40 incidents of physical assaults, 337 incidents of vandalism, 749 incidents of verbal or written harassment, 905 rallies, including anti-Semitic rhetoric, expressions of support for terrorism against the state of Israel. And on average, Jews in America have experienced nearly 34 anti-Semitic incidents per day, which coincides with the fact that we have heard many conversations where American Jews are saying their friends and relatives in Israel are checking on us. So judging from your reaction, I'm sure you've heard these statistics all too frequently the past 2 months. How does it make you feel as an American Jew and a Holocaust survivor?
Neil, let me change the question a little bit in order to answer.
Sure.
Am I on? Maybe I'm not. Hold on. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Okay. So I've been asked this question several times in the last several weeks and months. And the question usually is, Abe, with all your background and all the time that you've dealt with the issue of anti-Semitism, are you surprised? And the answer, Neil, is I'm not surprised, but I am shocked. I am not surprised because those of us in the field, those of us whose work it was to know what's going on and to do whatever one can to protect the Jewish community, not surprised because we were telling the American Jewish community, and I've been there for 50 years, 30 years as director, and the statistics were there. We were saying to the American public, but more so to the American Jewish community, anti-Semitism is a yes, it's a presence, it's a serious presence in this country. It is serious, it is deep. The truth is, nobody paid attention. Media certainly didn't pay attention. We lived in a bubble. We lived in a unique bubble, if you will. And and we thought America is unique. It is unique, but it isn't immune from hate and racism. So every year we issued a report which said, and so did the FBI, by the way, that the number one hate crime, religious hate crime in this country is anti-Semitism. That the number one subject and object of hate in this country, and I tell you, after 9/11, just don't misunderstand, but after 9/11, what everybody thought Islamophobia, no. Even after 9/11, the number one hate crime directed against the religious community continued to be the Jewish community. Our statistics indicated year in and year out, 1/3 of the American people still believed after the Vatican and Nostra Aetate, that we were forgiven, that we killed Christ. 1/3 of the American people throughout the years, 1/3, believed we are too powerful, too influential, too much control, etc. So it was always there. Now, sort of a miracle, the Jewish community developed a strategy of containment. That is, knowing that we cannot eradicate it, it's going to be there. So we came up with all kinds of efforts using, civility, using law, using whatever there was in order to contain it. And here is a statistics which is a positive one. In 100 years in this country, from the lynching of Leo Frank in 1913 till Pittsburgh, while thousands and millions of Jews in that 100 years were killed throughout the world, there were 3 Jews killed in this country. 3. Meir Kahane, a young student yeshiva boy on Brooklyn Bridge. Those were Middle East related, and the Crown Heights. So, if you will, there is a reason for the Jewish community to sort of say, hey, this is the new paradise. This is the new Golden Medina. So, but again, you asked me, no, I was not surprised because I knew it was there. And the question was, at what point in time, what's the flashpoint? What's the moment where this latent anti-Semitism so deep would come to the fore? But I will say to you that I'm still astounded at the depth of the hate, the intensity of the hate. Sure, people hate, and I think what sort of fooled us is we knew these people hated, but they weren't going to act on it. And they're not going to come forward on it. And so one shock is the nature of the intensity of the hate that's there. And 2 is, I was never Pollyanna. I understood, and those of us in the field understood, that yes, we're out there, if I'm not for myself, who will be, but we also understood if I'm only for myself, what am I? And so we were motivated throughout these years as we build the defense mechanism, if you will, to reach out for partnerships. But none of us were naive to think that, God forbid, if an eruption will come, that those people will come and stand with us and embrace us. But having that understanding, I was shocked to the level of silence, to the extent that we are alone. I think that's, well, I'll give you a positive shocking. The positive shock is the United States government, with all its mishigas, with all its weakness, with all its foibles, and we have tsaras here which go way beyond Jewish tsaras. We have tsaras of our democracy, etc. But look what happened in this time, what I would say almost miracles. The American government several months ago decided that it is its responsibility to fight anti-Semitism. For 50 years, Neil, when I was in the ADL, we would knock on the doors of Washington and congressmen and senators and governors and said, please stand up, do up, say something. Almost a year ago, 9 months ago, this government took an initiative and developed a program which this government said to the world, anti-Semitism is our responsibility. In a way, if you will, I think one of the most historic moments in our lifetime. Number 2, President Biden, I don't care where you are politically. You're to hate. You can like the other guy, you can love him, I don't care. But there is something. America had written off this man 3 months ago. He can't walk, he can't climb, he can't ride a bike, he's tumult, he's timish. He stood up for Israel and the Jewish people in a way that no president in the history of the United States ever did, and in a manner which even, they're playing politics with it. But the fact is, he said he's a Zionist. He's acting like a Zionist. with all the differences, and there are going to be a lot of differences, the fact is, when Congress couldn't authorize shells for the tanks, he did this and this in order to send Israel last week 1,600 shells for the tanks. So that's, a shock on the positive. So it's a long way to answer your short question, what these numbers mean.
Thank you so much. I think you just touched on everything I wanted to touch on, but thank you so much. I do want to highlight, yes, that you've been warning us. You've been warning us for many years. You wrote a book 20 years ago, Never Again.
Question mark.
Question mark, sorry, question mark. Yeah, absolutely. And I wrote your quote. Sorry. And you say in that book, this is 20 years ago, as a result of the disturbing events of the last few years, you were convinced that we currently face as great a threat to the safety and security of the Jewish people as we faced in the 1930s. So that was you talking 20 years ago, warning us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, you have to understand, I'm a survivor. And no survivor will ever say to you, never again, as certainty. No survivor honestly will say to you, never again. Okay? So part of it came out of who I was and where I came from. It's an aspiration. And that's why the never again was a question mark. Because we were seeing, you remember 20 years ago, and people like saying this never happened. Of course it happened. It was happening in Europe wide. And it started happening here. We started seeing the numbers of attacks growing every year. We saw it in all areas of our society. It was different. It was different, Neil. We'll get to it. If you ask why, this is one of the reasons. There are other reasons. But it was growing. It was becoming more and more serious. There was more of a chutzpah in attacking Jews. And there was this hesitance around. And so, yeah, the book was Never Again, question mark, can it possibly happen? And again, I say, mostly I'm biased by being a survivor. And therefore, maybe my antenna, vibrated a little bit more than most antenna, but I lived it. I saw it.
So now, that was a question for later. I was going to ask you about Never Again, because I teach, my students challenge me. In my introductory to the Holocaust class, they challenge me and say, Mr. Garfinkel, the theme of the Holocaust Museum, the motto is Never Again. And so last year they asked me when Russia went into Ukraine, and in Bosnia, and in Rwanda. So the theme of Never Again. Now, I know your book touched mainly on American Jews, but if I could read another quote that you had said about American Jews, which I thought was fascinating, and give me a second here. I'm sorry. Okay, you once described America as an underground sludge running through the country's sewers, usually controlled by the manhole covers. And now the current director of the ADL has almost piggybacked and continued saying the lid to the sewers is off, and the Jewish communities all across the country are being inundated with hate. How do you feel about that? Because you're known as an optimist, and that's some strong words.
I'm still an optimist.
Great.
Golda Meir once said, Jews don't have the luxury to be pessimists. And as a Holocaust survivor, where 1.5 million Jewish children perished and I survived, I don't have, how can I not be optimistic about the future of the Jewish people? So I don't have that option. But, I mentioned it earlier, what was happening, and we shouldn't take it lightly, but we should understand that it had a limited utility. For the last 100 years, the organized Jewish community did develop a strategy, what I would call a containment strategy. Those of us dealing with the subject of anti-Semitism always understood that it's a disease, a virus, without an antidote and without a vaccine. And if anybody, had different thoughts, if after Auschwitz, when the world saw what hate can do, what anti-Semitism brought. And they didn't put all their scientists and all their engineers and all their philosophers and all their educators to come together to develop an antidote, then we understood it's what we say in Hebrew, it's a yesh, it's a presence. It was, it is, and it will be. But having said that, you don't just say, okay. So the organized community did, in the last 100 years, develop what you want to call a firewall or a containment policy. And it used all elements in our society to contain it, knowing that it was there, knowing that, how do you keep it in the sewers? How do you build that cover that it's latent, but it doesn't? And so we used media, we used legislation, we used partnerships, relationships, you name it, whatever was in our society, we put together into this containment. And by the way, probably the most important element was truth. Okay? What is anti-Semitism? What is hate? It's the big lie. What's the answer to the lie? Truth. So we had all these elements, and they worked pretty well. But again, our job, the job of the organized Jewish community, the ADL, the American Jewish Committee, the American Jewish Congress, all these institutions, was to make sure that wherever it starts bursting out, we can continue like that. Now, something happened in the last 5-10 years. Number one is this. I remember in the early years of the social media, I made a lot of trips to Palo Alto, and I met with a lot of the geniuses, many of them Jewish, who created this new modern miracle. And I remember the conversations, and I was naive, but I said to them, thank you for this great gift of communication and interaction and education. But I said to them, but there is an unforeseen consequences, and there is an element of it which is bad, which is it's a superhighway for hate. It's a superhighway for lies. And their answer to me was, well, Mr. Foxman, it's algorithms. Ich weiß algorithm, right? Was weiß ich algorithms? Okay, now we know algorithms is something that they control. It's how they make money. So it wasn't STEM science working its way when we didn't know what. But they used it. And so this instrument, this new creation, is probably the most significant element in legitimizing, communicating, spreading anti-Semitism that we could have never imagined before. Two, and here again, I don't know where you are, and I love you and respect you, but I don't care. Trumpism. I don't even think Trump really knows and wants. He is what he is. But Trumpism destroyed in our society civility. It destroyed all the taboos. Part of the taboos and the civility worked for us. They worked for us. Not always, not everywhere, but it was part of that containment, part of that thing, spasnish, you don't do it, you don't say it, or you whisper it, you don't act on it. Came this guy, and he said, everything is okay. Now, when everything is okay, Jews have always been number one on the hit parade of hate and stereotypes and blame. So all of a sudden, we wake up with this monster and a new environment, And probably the most terrible thing that Trumpism did was eliminate truth. Truth was our weapon. Because again I said to you, anti-Semitism, racism is the big lie. How do you deal with the big lie? You tell the truth. But if there is no truth, and there is no truth, and by the way, there's no media. We used to use media. We used to use media to educate. We used to use media to shame, to explain. Fake news doesn't matter. There's no truth. And so, when you ask the question, okay, so what's the difference now? The difference now is we're in a totally different environment. And also, everything is politicized. And we're politicized, and anti-Semitism is politicized, and it's being used by both. To what extent it helps, we don't know yet. But so there's a new awareness, but it's as a result of a new danger. And now it's a clearer place, it's out there. People feel that it's okay. And just a final item on this. The Charlottesville 200 were not created by Trump. He didn't create them. They were always there. These neo-Nazis were always there, and that was in our files, in the ADL files, we had them. We knew they were there. But again, the containment was such that they understood that if they go public, there will be consequences. They're going to pay a price. And so they did their anti-Semitism in the sewer. Came Trumpism, and it was okay, and these 200 neo-Nazis, which again, he didn't create, but he gave them the hechsher. And all of a sudden, they marched in front of the cameras, and they said, here we are, we're neo-Nazis, we hate Jews, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, not afraid of any consequence. Again, when we talk about the 100 years, the difference between here and Europe is, in this country, while the Constitution permits you to be a bigot, our Constitution, freedom of speech, says you can be a bigot. But you have to take responsibility. In Europe, there were never consequences. Lehefe. In this country, there were consequences. And when you take away the consequences and fast forward to the universities today, there are no consequences. There are no consequences to hate speech. Well, there are consequences to some speech, but not to anti-Semitism. So if you create a situation where there are no consequences to being an anti-Semite, you don't pay a price, wow, that's what we're living through now.
Thank you. I think one of my takeaways here tonight is that I have to go home and sign up for an introduction to the Yiddish course because I'm not, I think I'm understanding, I'm piecing it together.
I'll remember to translate.
Okay, or hopefully we're taping. So let's move to education. Okay, a big part of the Anti-Defamation League, a big part of the internet. Really quick, the Anti-Defamation League has said 400 anti-Semitic incidents on colleges' campuses, 250 incidents targeting Jewish institutions. And I saw something on Facebook, a meme or a GIF or a GIF, I don't know what it was, the entrance to Auschwitz, and you see the sign that says, Arbeit macht frei. Well, this sign said, only in the right context. And that was my reaction.
Or there's a copy of Mein Kampf, Mein Context.
So I just would love to talk, I'm sure that's on all of our mind, you know, your views on education today, higher education. I hope some of my students are streaming. I'm sure they would love to get your take. And I just want to throw in one quote that you said also. We always assumed that it was a disease of the ignorant. No, it's not. It's a disease of the educated as well. We see what's happening in universities. And that touched me as an educator who leads well-educated teachers to Germany and Poland to see the camps. And I was always pushed to teach them more and more so they could go back to their classrooms. And so this quotation by you really threw me for a loop. So I was wondering if you could just talk about that and just higher education, and you had mentioned the media and everything.
Okay.
I know it's a lot.
You can learn to be a bigot in a nanosecond. It can happen at home, it can happen in school, it can happen in church, it can happen by a peer. And to unlearn it is a much, much tougher thing. And when we say it's a disease and a virus without an antidote and without a vaccine, the only thing we have is education. There is nothing else. There's nothing else. It's slow, it's tedious, but it's the only thing. And so then, when we wake up one day and see that, whoa, it's the educated. It's the educated. It sort of reminds me, there is an essay written by Mark Twain. Mark Twain, I don't know if you know, but if you don't know, you should look it up. You can Google it somewhere. It's called An Essay Concerning the Jews. Mark Twain was in a financial difficulty. He went around Europe to make money to pay off his debts. And he came home and he wrote an essay concerning the Jews. And he wrote that wherever he went, he found anti-Semitism. Smart people, stupid people, rich people, poor people, religious people, atheists. Wherever he went, he found anti-Semites. And so he wrote this essay. He came up with an answer, which if you want, I'll talk about later.
Look it up.
I'm starting to believe he may be right. Again, when you talk about education, and that's part of the problem, if we knew the one reason for anti-Semitism, then we should be able to solve it. The trouble is, it serves so many interests. It serves so many needs. It serves so many, whatever. It's fascist and Nazi and communist. It's used by religious. It's what Mark Twain said. It's a disease. It's a tool. That it's a stereotype that's been used for all, and see, we are, we're the mother and father of all prejudice. So when you start talking about education, what element do you touch? What element do you go, where do you go first? What do you attack first? What do you educate about? And especially when you know that and as we're seeing now, we used to think it was the ignorant. Remember, Mr. Trump, he said he likes the ignorant, okay? We don't like the ignorant. But now we're getting worried about the educated. Now, what's happening in universities is a much, much bigger issue today. It has the antecedents of the level of anti-Semitism today on the campus is both, I would say, 50, 60 years old, and something which is 5 and 10 years old. And it's the perfect storm of coming together of two elements, two very serious elements that play on the campus and which resulted in this explosion, in this tsunami of anti-Semitism. One is, I don't know how many of you in the audience, I go back and I remember when oil was king in this country, and this country was for sale. I'll never forget an ad we once ran in the New York Times, which a barrel of oil on its side, and it said, oil, it can heat your home, run your car, and blackmail your country. Well, 50 years ago, the Aramcos, the Libyas, the Saudi Arabias, the Qatars, they doubled the price of oil. All of a sudden, they woke up overnight with billions. And they had a strategy. They started buying America. Right? So what they bought very successfully were universities. They funded think tanks and all the top universities. What does that mean? They set up Middle East study centers. They funded it with grants, with scholarships, with students. And I remember in my day that some of the universities came to the ADL and said, listen, we're a little bit uncomfortable, what do we do? And we helped them develop non-discriminatory clauses, which now in retrospect was Gornish. It meant nothing, okay? So they couldn't discriminate against Jews. So what? Jews didn't apply because the universities had Middle East centers without Israel, without Jewish. That was their condition. Their condition was, you can hire Jews, but they can't teach Israel. Now, think about it. It's 40, 50 years. Because I think what shocks us, what shocks me, that shouldn't shock me, but is ignorant students, okay, brought in, okay, all right. And then we go to the second reason, wokeism, etc. But professors with MAs, with PhD, in history, in Middle East studies, Rebbeinu Shalom, where does this come from? Well, it comes from this. Scholarships, grants. And now what you have on the college campus is the second and third generation of students who are now professors, who are now faculty. And you know what? Again, no Israel, no Jewish studies, etc., because that was, in my day, again, I remember we were aware of it. We were aware of it. You had a student Zionist organization on campus. On 50 colleges, we had Jewish groups called Student Zionists. We had American Association for University Professors for Peace, Jewish academicians fighting. We had a Jewish student press. We had all these elements because we knew it was a problem. But you know, after a while, we just let it go. So part of what you're seeing is this inculcation of a biased view of Israel, Jews, the Middle East. Then comes the perfect storm when you have wokeism. Okay, you have this new Mishigas, which sees the world, society in terms of oppressors and oppressed, occupiers, etc. And where are Jews? Jews are the oppressors. Jews are the whites. And again, we stand out. We stand out everywhere. And interestingly enough, I've talked to some of the Jewish billionaires in the last couple of weeks. I said, you know, you have a building at NYU named after you. You have a building in Harvard. Did you ask for anything? I said, hey, what do you mean? I said, besides having your name on it, did you ask for Jewish studies, for Holocaust studies, for Israel studies? And the answer is no. So A was this situation we woke up to, plus wokeism, which singled us out as the enemy, as the oppressor, etc. And both of them together are now playing havoc on the campus. And again, be careful with the statistics. To say that 20% of youth 18 to 24 who can't even spell Palestine, who don't know what we should worry about it, but don't get hysterical over it. It's part of the ignorance. Americans don't teach history. Americans don't teach geography. Americans don't know history, don't know geography. I never got excited with the statistics that they don't know about the Holocaust. Why should they know about the Holocaust? They don't teach, after the Civil War, Americans don't teach history. They don't know about World War II. They don't know that hundreds of thousands of Americans fought. They don't know. So most feels that they should know about Auschwitz. So I don't get too excited. But I do get excited when they don't know, their answer is in the negative. We have a major challenge. And I think we need to, I think if we learned anything is, and I guess it's too strong, and I used it, there was a headline in the Jewish Standards this week, we are all alone. But we are alone. We are alone. And we should understand it. We should understand it. To me, it's not a new reality, but for the Jewish community, it's a new reality. We're alone. Therefore, again, when we go over the Hillel, Yemein Anili, this is number one. Number one, Jews, you want to give philanthropy? Good. But focus it. First, we need to take care of ourselves. I think for the foreseeable future, Neil, security is going to have to be our concern. It's going to have to be our concern because we're not going to turn the world around that much, even though this administration says they're going to give us money, et cetera, et cetera. So security. The second element is going to be how do we keep Jews as Jews? How do we keep Jews as Jews? Because the greatest fear for me is when I would read studies in Europe, the Jews are taking off their kippot, or Jews are afraid to send their kids to yeshiva or day school, or not going to synagogue, or you couldn't find a synagogue. I remember once Purim in Berlin, I couldn't find it. And then, I saw the police. I looked a second, and there it was. But the Jews said, this is where I need. That's my greatest fear, is that the anti-Semites, God forbid, have a victory because they frighten us from being Jews. Okay? So it's going to be security, and while we depend on the police and the FBI and all that's fine, we still need to be smart. We still need to take it as a responsibility for the foreseeable, not foreseeable future, but for a while. The other thing is, how do we build pride? the good news is, so far, I haven't seen very many statistics, but compared to a couple of years ago, more Jews are putting on kippot, more Jews are putting on mezuzahs than taking them off. That's critical. That's critical, because we'll find a way politically, and we'll find ways to rebuild this firewall. Okay, things will change. It's not going to be forever, but we have to make sure that when it changes, there are Jews there to envelop it. That's your job. That's a much tougher job than getting some legislation passed or hiring security. That's very, very, very serious. And again, I am an optimist, Neil. I've always been an optimist. And again, if you read the Jewish Standard, I apologize, but I was invited a couple of years ago to a seminar on whether Jewish civilization will survive. And they were very smart, the organizers. They had some scholars study Toynbee and Spengler, the historians of history, to see if they can distill what makes us different from other civilizations. Now, I know you could all have a list for this. We like latkes, whatever. It doesn't matter. But they came up with something which was really so simple and yet so deep. And they said that when the Roman Empire, if you know history, wow, the Roman Empire was the world. When the Roman Empire fell, no Roman got up and said, I want to be a Roman. How do I be a Roman? Where do I go to be a Roman? The Greek Empire, huge, it fell. No Greek came running on the door, hey, how can I be a Greek? And so what they found, they distilled to say, will Jewish civilization survive? And the answer is yes, if. After the destruction of the first temple, it was destroying the first temple, exile, Jews got up, brushed themselves up and said, I want to be Jewish. I want to start synagogues, Talmud, continue. After the second temple, again, tragedy. Jews got up and said, I want to be Jews. And if after the Holocaust, when 1/3 of our people perished, Jews got up and said, I want to circumcise my child. When my father took me to shul in 1945 in Vilna, when he sent me to yeshiva, when we built Israel, when the Jews in the Soviet Union that for 50 years were not permitted to be Jews woke up on one Simchas Torah and there was a hijacking because they wanted to be Jews, that's the secret of Jewish survival and civilization. And that's the test we now face. That's the test that we now face. To what extent will we stand up? Will we stand up and say, I want to be Jewish? Now, interesting, Israel, with all the pain and anguish that we're seeing there, Israel has already passed that test. If after October 7th, and after all that political, whatever you want to call it, if they got up and they said to each other, we want to be Israeli Jews, that's part of the continuation of the miracle. The next test is going to be us, the diaspora. Because we're part of that shidduch. We're part of that shidduch. And, there is no formula for it. We now know what it is. But how to instill it, how to make sure that your kids will come to the next generation of Abe Foxmans because they'll care, I don't know. But I am an optimist. What I'm seeing now, and these are scary times. Scary times in Israel, my God, and scary times here. More scarier because we lived in this bubble of luxury, lived in this fantasy that everything is wonderful. At least in Israel, every couple of years, they knew there was a war, they knew they have to pay a price. But here, Rebbeinu Shalom, all the universities, everything was open, we could move, Palm Beach, didn't matter, okay? I grew up at a time we could move to Palm Beach. Not that I wasn't moving, but okay, we fought for it. So this is the test. Now, to what extent is this generation going to stand up? And the first signs are pretty good. And I look at you, a lot is going to depend what you tell your children. Don't tell them to hide their Star of Magen David. Don't tell them to take off their kippah. Don't tell them. Parents are parents, and parents want to protect. But that's the victory that the anti-Semites will have. So it's not easy. It's never been easy. But again, I'm still an optimist.
Thank you. And in the displaced person camps, right after the war, in the camps, men were grabbing women and saying, let's get married, right? So we could start the circle of life all over again. So right after the Holocaust. I know your wife is an ex-New York City school teacher. I teach in New York City. We're given 2 days within the World War II unit to teach about the Holocaust. And just to your point also about mezuzahs and kippot, I know there was a question of should we put our menorahs out this year during Hanukkah, and I hope a lot of people did. Mr. Foxman, you talk about being alone. Did you march with other groups when they were fighting for their rights? I know there's that famous picture of Theodore Herzl with Dr. King.
No.
I got it wrong? Okay. Heschel, thank you. Did you march with other groups?
I grew up at a time, it was the Vietnam War, I didn't march. I was not a marcher. I'm a marcher now, I wasn't a marcher. But in the ADL, I did promote, again, ADL has, if you will, the mission, Hillel's mission, which is to fight the defamation of the Jewish people and equal rights for all. But again, in all honesty, it was a 1 and a 2. And in very few instances in my 50 years was the one come in conflict with 2. Most of the time, it didn't. But once in a while it did, and when it did, number 1 was number 1. Because that was I understood that's my mission, as first to protect the Jewish. Now, we did embrace, because it's tzedek, tzedek tirdof. We were taught to pursue justice. And again, it's the Hillel teaching, but again, it's what you expected. I think we were all naive. Most of us were naive. We thought that, we're doing it because it's right, but we're doing it also, it's shlach lachap now, put it on the water, and when the time will come, it'll be. And that was really naive, and we see it today. So again, I don't think we should stop because it's part of who we are, it's part of our teaching. But we shouldn't fool ourselves that if we do that, we don't have to be Jewish, or this will protect us. I think we need to be more realistic and more honest. And again, so I did, we stood up for LBGT, stood up for civil rights, but I also understood something else. We fought for civil rights, okay? And we fought for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 with a passion. By the way, we fought for immigration because we suffered because of lack of immigration. So it was for everybody, but it was for us. It was for us because we wanted open doors for Jews, God forbid if they need to come from Syria or Russia or whatever. So it had its altruistic, universalist, everybody else, but there was, in essence, it was also for us. So we fought for civil rights. Okay, so I'll give you the first example of, we fought for everybody's rights and how it impacted on us. And I'll go back to Palm Beach, okay? Palm Beach, Boca, Florida, in the 1960s was discriminating against Jews. Jews could not get reservations, no. And we, with all our efforts, ADL, American Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee, we couldn't get very far. Passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Like, oh, they said it wasn't for us. Well, you know what? It was for us. 3 months afterwards, the ADL submitted reservations to the Breakers and to Boca with 6 reservations in Jewish names and 6 reservations in non-Jewish names for the same period of time. And within a week, the Breakers sent back, we got reservations for the O'Malley's, the Smiths, the McGillicuddies, but not for the Goins, Greenbergs, and Cohens. Same thing happened in Boca. For the first time, we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 said you cannot discriminate in interstate commerce. So for the first time, legislation, which everybody thought only serves the African American and minority community, all of a sudden became a weapon in our hands. And we went to the Breakers, we went to Boca, and we said, gentlemen, wait, there was only gentlemen then in the corporate offices. Look at this. And we said, if you don't change it in 2 weeks, we're going to sue. Within a month, they turned around, and all of a sudden, there was room for the Cohens and Greenbergs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you say you act on behalf of, every time we raise the level of civility, of equal rights, it raises or protects our level. So yeah, we do it because tzedek, tzedek, we do it because it's the right thing to do, but we also do it just for ourselves. And therefore, but I said to you earlier, I was still shocked at the level of silence and indifference, at the level of silence of indifference, which is, and you know, that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue because it's the right thing, but we shouldn't kid ourselves and know that at the end of the day, we are alone. We are alone. We need the government. We need the government. There's no question about it. We need the government. But aside from that, we need to worry about our safety and security first, and then who we are and what we are.
And that leads me just to one more point before we take some questions. So what can we do? I don't want to speak for all of us, but I know a lot of us were frozen after October 7th. I know personally I didn't know what to say or what to do because I was taught that you don't compare anything to the Holocaust, and then it was the most amount of deaths since the Holocaust in one day. So can we write letters? Can we continue to host programs like this? And what shouldn't we do? What words of advice do you have for us?
Well, I don't know what you shouldn't do, but I know what you should do, and your voice is important. We're losing a battle. We're losing a battle because of ignorance. We're losing a battle. You know what? There are more of them than there are of us. That's a reality. We're noted for being smart and being out there and being creative and being this. We don't utilize all our efforts. So the answer is yes. Don't, you know, I remember in my days with the ADL, people would get frustrated. They would write a letter. Do you know how many letters I wrote to the New York Times? I think I can do a book of letters that I wrote to the New York Times that never got published, okay? I'm trying to find out. So that didn't stop me. Just because 1 in 100 got published didn't stop me from writing a letter, because maybe got Neil's letter published. So the answer is, yeah, your voice is important, and don't neglect it. Your voice is important politically. If your local congressman is good, don't say, oh, good. Let him know he's good. Let him know that it's important. If he's not good, Avada tell him that he's no good. But what we tend to do is the ones that are good, we just take for granted. They need to know that you're there. They need to know that you're going to be there. It isn't that easy for all of them. It's tough out there. It's ignorant, it's hateful, it's tough. So yeah, absolutely have your voice heard. In terms of voice, in terms of money, whatever. So if they're good, let them know that they're good, but don't take them for granted. And this is a very difficult time. I sat with the Prime Minister in July and on a one-on-one, and he said to me, so Abe, tell me about America. And I said, I'm not sure you want to hear. He said, tell me anyway. And I said to him, you know, this may be the last administration that's pro-Israel. And he said to me, why do you say that? I said, because what's happening to the young generation is Vayakam Dor Chadash Shelo Yada et Yosef. There comes this new generation, as we say in Egypt, in Pharaoh, came a new generation that did not know Joseph. Well, we have a new generation in this country that did not know Joseph. They don't know borscht, and they don't know Holocaust, they don't know 48 wars, 67 wars, they don't know anything. They don't know anything. So don't expect the next political generation of Democrats, and it's not a question about they're anti or this, they don't know, and therefore they don't care, and it's not in their agenda. And the next generation of American political leadership is going to be Latino, okay? This country is going to decide whether to give money to Costa Rica or Israel. This country is going to decide on the values of the Hispanic community in terms of church-state, okay? So this is the last generation where, you know, the Richie Torres, how many Richie Torres can you count on the fingers of your hand, okay? So number two, Republicans are isolationists. Hello, it's a new world. Look what's happening. They love Israel, and they're so isolationist that all these people, who love Israel, can't pass the legislation to give them arms. Why? Because the border is important. I'm not saying the border is important. This is a new America. Evangelicals have discovered they don't need us for the second coming of the Mashiach. They don't need us. And Jews, I said to them, you know what? Pardon me for the word. I said, Israel is so pissed on American Jews. They don't recognize this, they don't like this, they don't care, etc. So they're also going to be a different generation. So this is the moment. This is the moment where we still matter. This is the moment that it matters what you say and what you do. By the way, in the first month after October 7th, $1 billion was raised by the Jewish community for Israel. Wow, that says something. And this is people who don't like Bibi, who disagree with Bibi, who are upset about religious pluralism. All these issues all of a sudden went out the window because we understand the moment. And as long as you understand the moment, we have to overcome all the grishiness, all the kvetching, all the things that we don't like, and stand up. And so far, I would say to you, as tough as it is to be an optimist, I look at you. It's 4 o'clock. I know you don't want to watch the Jets, because that's a bracha alavatollah, I know. But still, my wife said to me, who are you going to talk to, yourself? It's raining. You sure you want to go? You know what? So even looking at you, I say to myself, and you didn't come to hear jokes, and I don't sing, and we don't entertain. You came to hear about Soros. Okay, but you came to hear about Soros because you care. Because you care. And wow, that goes back to that distilling element of Jewish survival. And that is, it's tough. It really is tough. It's tough out there in Israel. It's very tough. It's very painful. I mean, I watch Israeli TV, and my wife says, stop watching Israeli TV, you got a triple ulcer. But okay, and it's tough here. Because all of a sudden, you know what? You got to think whether you should put up that sign, I stand with Israel, in front of your house, okay? That's a decision. I hope you make the right decision. But it's a decision. For the first time, it ain't that simple. It's not just writing a check to the UJA or to Israel Bonds or JNF. All of a sudden, putting that little box which says I stand with Israel becomes a very serious question. Okay, I hope you make the right decision. I believe you'll make the right decision. I have enough faith in the Jewish people that they'll make, but it's still a question, will they make the right decision?
Thank you.
We're not done. We're not done.
And thank you, Neil
We're not done.
Garfinkel.
We're not done.
We are not done.
We're not-
If you have a
sorry.
question, please line up. We have 2 microphones in the 2 walkways, so we'll kind of go from one to the other. So we'll start over here at this side. Jana, please
And you
ask.
can ask Neil too.
I was going to say, I'm not taking questions, ask it.
You can take it.
Is it all right to ask 2 questions? Okay. First question goes back to universities. Do you have a list for aspiring students for schools where they will be supported physically and also in their intellectual growth?
Okay, that's a very tricky question. There is no entity today with enough credibility and lack of political interest and whatever who will come with the list. There's no U.S. News and World Report list on where Jews are safe and secure. And I've talked about it with some people, and the problem is you need an institution that has credibility to be able to do it, and because otherwise it becomes, now. But by the way, there are ways. So Brandeis University this week issued a 60-page report, which basically says these are the schools with more problems, with less problems, and they tell you. So yeah, if I were a billionaire, one of the things that I would do is I would pick 5 universities. I would go to the universities and I would say to them, give the money back to Qatar. The Jewish community will fund these 5 universities or 7 or whatever, and you guarantee us that Jews will feel secure, Jewish students will feel secure. So, and again, I was in the 60s, I was on the campus. The same 25 universities then were a problem for different reasons. But so, yeah, you're looking for a very quick answer. There is no quick answer because there is no credible entity that will give you that answer. Because if it's a right-wing organization, they'll go after. So you have to. But there is enough information today to make your judgment, to make your own judgment.
You spoke eloquently, thank you, on the difference in repercussions in the US and in Europe to hate speech. Is it too much to tease apart the type of anti-Semitism we experience in Europe versus in the United States?
Europe is a much, much deeper anti-Semitism, and it's much more religious, political. Listen, Western civilization anti-Semitism is based on Christianity. That gave it life, that gave it purpose, that gave it, and again, so people say to me, I say, you don't need a lecture. Why is there Christian Western anti-Semitism? Why is there Western? It's Christianity. Because the Romans killed Christ. And then 100 years later, they became Christians. So how can they kill Christ? So they didn't, we did, okay? That's as simple and as complicated of 2,000 years and it's deep and it's ingrained and it's therefore been used by the atheists and by the Soviets, and everybody has used it, by Hitler. Someone said, why did Hitler succeed? And then I remember the historian who said, first they came and they said to the Jews, you cannot live amongst us as Jews, convert. Then they came and they shortened the phrase and they said, you cannot live amongst us, expulsions. Then came Hitler and said, you cannot live. So it was the predisposition it's totally different there. Here, no, it's not, it has elements. Look, anti-Semitism in the Hispanic community is imported. Nostra Aetate and the forgiveness of the church didn't make it in Mexico City, okay? So they still come with the old prejudices. Their ignorance is important. Their ignorance in terms of stereotypes to believe in conspiracy theories comes from. So, they bringing it. A lot of what's happening in Europe, the anti-Semitism, is by conveyor belt of Muslims. We did a survey of 100 countries in the world 10 years ago. Anti-Semitism in the Arab, North African world is 80 to 90%. 80 to 90% are anti-Semitic. And they came to Europe. And they're not assimilating, they're not giving anything up, they just superimpose it. I watched that film that the Israeli government is showing in some places of what happened on October 7th. And what I found, the hate, it was not about occupation. They didn't talk about Israelis. They didn't talk about Zionists. They talk about Jews, dogs. It was so deep, anti-Semitism, etc. So it's different here. It's not as ideological, but the impact that people can hurt Jews and kill Jews doesn't matter. The conspiracy theory, whether it's based on history or based on some mishigas that they pick up here, is as dangerous as any other. Yeah.
Oh, this is on, I hope. You touched on civil rights, and that strikes a chord with me because back in the 60s, I was very active for fair housing. It's in our DNA, Jews, to be civil. And I spent quite a bit of energy for, as I said, civil rights and fair housing in Montgomery County in Maryland. Fast forward, I was a teacher for a while, and the black kids asked me to be head of the Black History Club. And there were other black teachers, but they asked me as a white person. Fast forward, I was very upset that some of the leaders of Black Lives Matter threw us under the bus. And I'm wondering, has anybody in the ADL approached some of the leaders of the Black Lives Movement? Because after all the work that I put in, in my energies, to have this happen, I'm very disturbed about it. So that's my question.
Okay. So, by the way, the first case I ever worked on was Jones versus Mayer.
What's that?
The first case I ever worked on in the ADL as a lawyer was Jones versus Mayer,
Yes.
the landmark case in housing discrimination. And I'm not sorry we won. So to answer your question, I can't answer for the ADL. I've been retired 8 years. I have very little to do with the ADL. So I would assume that they talk to the Black Lives Matter movement, but I have no idea. Look, there is no leadership in that community that's positive. The last African-American leader who spoke positive to Jews and about Israel is Martin Luther King. Since then, the most popular voice is Louis Farrakhan. Louis Farrakhan. So whether, Jesse Jackson Hines, Jesse Jackson Morgan, all right, he apologized, did this, Al Sharpton. Okay, they have 2 or 3 leaders. They didn't excel in terms of standing up to the anti-Semitism. They played it. They used it. So you have no leadership out there to stand up and say, where we're going. And again, it's not because we did. It's not because you and I fought for civil rights. It's not because the NAACP was funded by Kivy Kaplan. It's not about the United Negro College Fund was funded only by Jews. So nobody likes the hand that feeds it. So it's not about, the problem is they don't have leadership, and they don't have the leadership to stand up to Farrakhan. What you're seeing in what's his name, Kylie Irving, and
Kanye.
These are the teachings of Farrakhan. Mm-hmm. These are the students of Farrakhan. And they also believe something that he has taught them, that we, the Jews, took away their birthright, that victimhood belonged to them. And the Jews have become, and everything that we've achieved was because we played our victimhood, which belonged to them. And that's deep. It's a jealousy, it's an anger, and the reason the Black Lives Matter, they don't know, and there's nobody there to tell them, where are you going, what are you doing, where's it going to get you? And so whether the ADL spoke to them or not, I'm not sure it makes a difference. It's a lack of leadership or a lack of proper leadership.
Thank you.
This is more of a comment than a question. I just feel anti-Semitism should be a bipartisan issue. I think when you get partisan about it, you lose people. So what I'm suggesting is that we have a big umbrella, so to speak, approach, and try to get everyone under that umbrella. When we take one side, we lose the other side. That's not the way to go, in my opinion. I think we need to organize and be unified, and it would be better if both the left and the right got together on the issue of anti-Semitism and not make it a one-sided issue. Actually, the anti-Semitism today is coming more from the far left than it is from the right. And that's a big issue. There's more support now for Hamas among the far left, the progressives. I'm talking about Tlaib and some of those people. We have to address that issue. That's a growing phenomenon where the left is swinging too far left, and that's not good for us. We need everyone behind the anti-Semitism issue, unify the people, don't be bipartisan, don't be partisan. That's my suggestion.
Okay, you're talking to the converted. But the problem, though, is it's not only within us, okay? We're being played by both sides. So the right is using us and the left is using us. The right is using us against the left and the left is using us against the right. We have to be smart to understand they're being used, when we're being used, and not to permit them. Easier said than done. But you're right. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think freedom of speech is pretty important in society. That being said, given what you said about how important the truth is for us and the power of social media, has that made you rethink maybe the balance of freedom of speech?
Whoa. Before my time, the ADL and some other groups tried to develop a group libel statute in this country. It failed every test of every court. So, in I don't know how many years, but no great scholars, and all of those who worried about strategy, were able to develop a law which would act against hate speech. So we have a unique situation in that our Constitution gives you the right to be a bigot. And so there's no way to legislate. In fact, BDS legislation, if it goes up to courts, except if they're right-wing courts in Texas or Florida, are going to lose because it is a restriction of freedom of speech. So we have this unique situation of how do we balance it? And it's worse now here with this. We're going to have to live with it. But what worked in this country before was consequences. So I'll tell you, when I was in the ADL, on our 100th anniversary, people would ask me, can you come up with one thing that the ADL did that had the greatest impact on fighting hate and anti-Semitism? And I said, yeah, I wasn't there, but I'll tell you what we did. We passed an anti-mask law. We wrote it, we advocated it, and we got Congress to pass it. Thus haste anti-mask law. Again, Constitution permits you to be a bigot. So the Ku Klux Klan, hello, all they were doing is exercising their freedom of speech, marching, talking about their hate. And remember, Ku Klux Klan was not just big in the South, they marched to Madison Square Garden. They were in Philadelphia, and they were in Chicago, they were everywhere. So the ADL came up with an anti-mask law, which said, you have the right to be a bigot, but you have to take responsibility for your bigotry. And taking responsibility is taking off that hood, because these people at night were bigots, during the day they were pharmacists, doctors, lawyers, grocerymen, etc. The one single act that broke the back of the Klan was the anti-mask law. One single thing, because it said you can speak, but take responsibility. Fast forward 50 years later, comes this. Puts the mask back on the bigot. So it's a question of anonymity, because I'll give you an example. In my time, I would write a letter to the New York Times, and let's say they decided, they're going to print it. I would get a call. I would have to identify myself. I would have to prove to them who I am. They would even negotiate language. But they have to know who. Today, you write a letter to the New York Times online, you can say whatever you want. Nobody bothers. So there's freedom of speech and there's freedom of speech. We have a major challenge, and it goes back to this. After 9/11, this country woke up in a trauma, and it found itself confronting two issues. How do we preserve civil liberties and protect life? We were getting killed because of our civil liberties. And this country, for better or for worse, made a compromise. I don't know how many of you remember, how many of you know, we have a Patriot Act. That said to us, we said to each other, we're going to limit our freedoms. We're going to give up on our civil liberties because life is more important than some of the civil liberties. I don't know how many remember you used to get on a plane with Gurnish. You used to go to a federal building with Gurnish. There were no cameras. There are cameras everywhere. We gave up a measure of our civil liberties in order to make this balance to protect life. We have another challenge now, and it is how do we balance civility with freedom of speech? And we're in a bruch, and the bruch is who's going to do it? After 9/11, you like Bush or not, he led. It's hard to lead here. You have a Congress which is nuts, absolutely nuts, okay? And who are you going to give it to? Elon Musk? Who's going to decide to find this balance between civility and freedom of speech? And what you saw, this mishigas, this circus with the 3 university professors, they were so worried not pissing somebody off somewhere, etc., that their lawyers took away their common sense. They're not bad people. They were being protected from being sued on issues, etc. So, yeah, we have a major challenge. How do we balance it? And again, you need to have consequences. In Europe, there is no freedom of speech, if you will, but they still have anti-Semitism. They still have hate. So that's not necessary, but it did work for us. It worked for us more or less well.
Mr. Foxman, we live across the river from Paterson, New Jersey. Paterson, New Jersey has a sizable Muslim population. October 8th, they were handing out candy in the streets of Paterson, and it wasn't because Halloween was coming up. They were celebrating. Now, there's been a lot of silence from the Muslim community about this, and yet there are Jewish leaders, clergy, who want to reach out to the Muslim community. My question is, are they wrong? Are they naive? Is it too soon? What is your opinion? Do you think that it's too soon? I mean, I don't get it.
The answer to your question is yes to all of them. And that is, there is no one answer. And not all Muslims are alike, like not all Jews are alike. And I think we still have to continue to believe that there are good. You also have to understand they live under intimidation also. I'll take it from the whatever, to the micro. Bibi Netanyahu said yesterday or whatever, he said, you know how many European leaders privately tell me you're right and do whatever you want, etc., and publicly say something else? So if Sisi and Dussi and all of them, so understand the people in Paterson. And some, there are many of them who think it's horrific. By the way, it's against Quran. What they did was so against the Quran, etc. But they're intimidated and they're afraid. And so, again, we should not, with a one sweep say they're all. So I think some people, those who are outspoken out there, I think we should challenge them and ignore them. But there are a lot of good people who are afraid, who need to know that we know that they're afraid. And so again, the answer is depends. The politicians are the key here. But you also understand their votes, but we also vote. Now in Paterson, they're they're a major vote. And so that's another conversation to be held with the elected officials, because we do give money, we do vote, et cetera. So the answer is there is no one. Everybody's got a role. If you have a relationship, you need to continue that relationship, but you also need to understand that they are also afraid, that most of them, this is not what they're about. I have an agent here. An agent have a question? Dr. Rosen, you're my agent here.
Good evening, Mr. Foxman. It's very disturbing when I watch the news, and I'm not a real news junkie, but since October 7th, I've become much more interested. And we see every night Palestinian hospitals, the rubble in the Gaza neighborhoods, and it just has to affect people's view of what's going on there. But we don't see anything of the suffering of what happened October 7th. And according to what we've heard from the Israeli leadership, they have videos of all, not obviously what took place, but of the aftermath. And supposedly the Jews control the media. So, you know, there's a disconnect there on both sides. I just wonder if you could perhaps address that.
Watch 60 Minutes tonight. They're finally interviewing a hostage, somebody, et cetera. Look, Golda Meir once said, if I have to choose between a good obituary in the New York Times or a critical editorial, a good obituary for an Israeli that was killed, or a bad story, a criticism for an Israeli that lived, I'll take the first. So media is biased, there's no question about it. And Israelis can do better, can not do better. The issue is not whether the Israeli PR is good. There is a media bias, but there's also a reality. Even the worst of the media, even the best, need to show you both. They can't show you only the Israelis, okay, and what's happening to the Israelis. They got to show you the other side. And the other side is horrific. It's horrific. We can ask the question, why are you focusing so much on us? But you know what? Jews are news. We're here. We are significant. We don't control it. But so that's part of the reality. I saw that 47-minute film. And last night on one of the Israeli channels, they had an hour program. The Israelis have 200,000 film clips from October 7th. Imagine 200,000. And I walked out after the 47-minute film, and I said, you know what? I'm ready. I think the world should see it. You're not, we're not going to convince the anti-Semites. You're not going to, but you're going to convince some of the decent people who really have a problem with, let's say it's not 18,000 Palestinians, let's say it's 10,000 Palestinians. It's not 10,000 kids, it's 5,000 kids. They have a problem. And we have to understand it's a legitimate problem. And again, you're smart. I pick my channels. I know which channels bend over backwards and which don't. CNN used to be hell. It's not hell now, okay? You can watch Fox, I can't take it even if they're good, but it doesn't matter. You know, so we also, you know, we pick where, but the answer is not in the PR. And, you know, it's at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If Israel's successful, then they're going to kill and they're going to destroy. It doesn't make nice pictures. And yeah, but I think we should use what we have. There's no, listen, I saw it. It was the most difficult thing that I've ever seen in my life. And I know it's even worse than what I saw. But I believe we're in such a war of survival. And if Israel says this is its second war of independence, then they should use everything at their disposal. Because I think it makes a difference. Thank you.
What can I do myself? What can I do if I hear someone talking about the horrible Israelis. What can I personally do?
Lisa, if you want,
If I'm somewhere and I'm hearing anti-Semitic talk, what can I do?
well, it depends where you hear it and where you read it. Okay, so it's on all kinds of levels. If you hear it from your friends and neighbors, that's one response. If you read it or you see it, yeah, you can do. That means they do care. They're in money business. They care who watches, believe it or not. So you can do. If you find something offensive, speak out. If it's something in the local community, speak out. Try not to do it alone, certain things. People say to me, I wouldn't confront an anti-Semite. You're not going to change his mind, okay? But certainly if it appears in an area where you can write, you can call, you can have your voice heard, absolutely do. Most of us feel it doesn't matter. The answer is it does matter. It does matter. But use seichel. Use seichel. If somebody confronts you in the street, don't take them on. And don't think you're going to convince, but use the instruments that our society provides us to have our voices heard. Absolutely. Don't wait for them to do it. You do it.
Thank you.
Very quick, it's for both of you, actually.
Uh-oh.
Since you are a teacher, and you're you.
Teacher.
You are Abe Foxman. What I see is that there are a number of states, as you know, who teach the Holocaust. Either have Holocaust classes or teach a little bit more about the Holocaust. What can we do on a national level so that that education is not, I know most education is controlled by the state. New Jersey does require the Holocaust to be taught as well as New York. But what can we do on a national level, with the Department of Education or with our congresspeople so that there is a national effort to teach the Holocaust? Because
Okay, Neil, you want to start?
No, I'm just going to say that we actually touched on this a little bit when we were talking before the program. I teach in New York, and it's not required in New York. It's not mandated. And I am a little biased because this is my 29th year of teaching. Only 3 years ago was I allowed to teach my elective on Introduction to the Holocaust. So I'm right with you, and Mr. Foxman, you had some views on that, right? You were.
Yeah, the answer is it's politics. It's politics. New Jersey has a Holocaust Commission. I sat on the original one with Governor Kane, and I was just recently reappointed. And you know what? I'm flabbergasted by the amount of work that they do. Yeah. Now, they can do more. You can give them a contribution. They have a budget, which is chaykak, pardon me. But even with that, they do an awful lot. I go to meetings, they do an awful lot. They provide materials, incentive, programming. So, they can also take contribution, tax deductible, but they can do more. One of the frustrations is, I've been trying very hard to get New York State to have a New York State Commission. Of all places in the world, the state of New York, and you know why? Because enough of us didn't care enough to say to the governor, you want my support? This is what I want. So that's what we need to do. But there are other issues.
You have a couple of Jews in New York.
Even in situations where quote unquote it's mandated. Mandate by itself doesn't mean anything unless that you give the teachers the time to prepare, to go, so it's a lot of it is just on paper with legislation. Hey, I did it, etc. Some of them don't have funding. You have commissions without funding. I sit on the Holocaust Museum in Washington. They do an awful lot. What they can do oodles more. And listen, they've raised $1 billion since their inception. That their job is, the thing is to teach teachers. But to teach teachers is not enough. Why? Because if teachers don't get the time to teach or to present it or have the option, so it's wonderful. By the way, the Teacher of the Year in New Jersey is a Holocaust education
Yes,
teacher.
yes.
And we're hoping he'll be the educator of the year in America, which will give incentive. But the answer is political pressure. Political pressure. It's cheap. It really is in the hierarchy of what the politicians have to do. But then the trouble is you get it passed and people just let it go. So if New Jersey, its budget is $1.5 million, if its budget was $3 million, they can do twice as much.
And again, I lead teachers, right? So the goal of my trip is I lead teachers from across the country for them to go back into the classroom and to bring the knowledge of what they saw. But they need time, right? They need time to do the prep work, to work with other teachers.
Well, and also, I mean, to some extent, we do an echo chamber. Everybody's here, because 90.
It does make a difference. It does make a difference.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Neil, if you want to just wrap up our questions for this evening?
Yeah, thank you. You're such an optimist. I was going to try to close with, to ask you to say something optimistic, but everything you said tonight, such great words. Thank you. So I just want to read a couple of words that you've said, and if maybe you could try to sum up and make us feel, because it's hard out there, right? We're all here, like you said, because we care. It's hard. It's tough. It's tough to know what to say, how much to say. So if you could just, hopefully some of my students are there, some of us young adults, some of us older adults, just if you could give us something new. You said, and I love this, and this is why I wrote it down, we say it with pride that we want to be Jews because we value it. We value who we are and our commitment to each other. The community will endure. So if you could just talk to us.
Saying it is not enough.
Go.
Saying it
Right.
is not. Believing it is important. And again, it's amorphous. Pride, there is no formula for pride. Can I embarrass you? How many of you were in Washington 2 weeks ago?
A lot.
Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. That was a sense of pride. That was a sense of standing up. I live in Bergenfield, Teaneck. Teaneck's got an issue with the schools. There, the pride is when the Jews come out. The Board of Education meeting is part of pride. It's not just going to shul, it's not just lighting candles, whether it's important, because that's important, because that's the message you give your children and your grandchildren. Don't discount that, but it's not enough. It also means standing up so that the others see the level of pride. And again, I am very much encouraged. I see a lot, and again, trauma works both ways. Trauma can be very negative, and trauma can be very positive. In Israel, the trauma is, again, a miracle. But I see it here. I see it here. And again, we're a community and generation that has lived the Golden Medina. And so all of a sudden, we're not used to marching, picketing, speaking out. And so it's not part of our, hello, how many of you involved in political campaigns? Because it really wasn't that important. Things were going fine. It's now important. So part of pride is not only lighting the Hanukkah menorah, and not only making sure that the outside world sees, but it's also engaging in acts and manifestations and advocacy which tells the world that you're proud of who we are and what we are and our future. And there are a lot of opportunities. And what you're doing, Magen David Adom, which people didn't even know existed, all of a sudden, Magen David Adom becomes a significant lifeline for Israelis. I went to an event called the Day After Fund, an event called by 10 Jewish philanthropic families. And the purpose is to rebuild the kibbutzim, the Gaza Strip. Whoa, that's very, very, very serious. But, here's an American Jewish community, pissed at Israel, pissed at Bibi, all that, coming together, and these are families who can make it happen, And that's it's an element of standing up because not only do you believe in there, but so yeah, there are ways. You see them every day. Some of you ask the questions. Use your seichel. Again, don't go confronting an anti-Semite in the street. Don't be a hero. That's not going to do it. And when you hear it, whether it's in place of work, there are ways to deal with it. There are ways to deal with it. Get advice, but stand up. Don't take it. That means if you hear something which is outrageous or is anti-Semitic, don't let it pass by. But confront it with seichel. Use guidance, ADL, committee, the rabbi, whatever. But there are ways. Don't let it just go by, because letting it go by, it just builds and builds and builds, and then it can come forward. Thank you for coming. Thank you, my agent.
Very much.
I guess he's done.
A special thank you to Abe Foxman and to Neil Garfinkel for an insightful afternoon. If you would like to make an additional donation to Magen David Adom or Leket Israel, please see me or Lois. Mark down Monday evening, January 22nd, where Rabbi Ronald Roth will be presenting a photo exhibit of his trip, The Jews to Patsov. Thank you so much for joining us.
And leading that club.